cause I can bust you like a question mark block. Like a gift that you won't teach you to the school of hard shocks. Sharp blades like imperial rage, burn hot, expose plots, cut holes in eye sockets, walking apocalypse.
What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from SBMTG on the youtube.com down there we like magic, and today I've got a deck for you as usual, right? Back to budget territory, and this time we're going to do the other red-white aggro deck in the format. We all know about red-white vehicles, but there's another one that's going to cost you like a fraction of the price of red-white vehicles, and it performs pretty well. This is red-white equipments. People have been asking me to do this deck for a while, and I can see why. It's a pretty fun deck with a lot of good creatures, and a lot of people say we have terrible equipments right now. That's actually not necessarily true. Let me show you what we got, starting with the creatures. The two most important creatures in the deck are Weapons Trainer and Stonehaven Outfitter, so we're going to play 4 of both of those. I figured I'd start off with these guys because they're really the entire reason to play this deck. And it's funny, creatures. We have creatures that are the whole reason to play an equipments deck, not necessarily the equipments. But again, I contend that we have good equipments right now. But Weapons Trainer is just obvious. She's good by herself, you know, 2 mana, 3 power. That's always nice. But if you got an equipment out, obviously your other guys get a little buff, and that's fantastic. You don't even have to equip the equipment. You just have to be out. It's great. And Stonehaven Outfitter is obviously a great source for resiliency and gives buffs to all of our equipped guys. And it's an artificer, that will matter. You know, it's an allied, that will matter a little bit too. So 2 very relevant creature types on Outfitter. Not to mention the buff, not to mention the card draws. The card's ridiculous and obviously goes as a 4-of in this deck. Now let's actually move down the curve and tell you about our other creatures here. We're playing 4 Toolcraft Exemplar, 4 Inventor's Apprentice, and 2 Stoneforge Acolyte. I was originally playing Expedition Envoy, but I like Stoneforge Acolyte more. We've got a total of 10 allies in the deck. That's just enough to consistently pull off that cohort ability. And it's really good when you can, you know, it's a way to dig into your deck and get a relevant card. Card advantage is always good. And this is important, Expedition Envoy cannot survive Liliana's +1, but Stoneforge Acolyte can. That's actually really important. Toolcraft Exemplar and Inventor's Apprentice are sort of no-brainers if we're looking for 1-drops, because we're playing 18 different equipments in the deck, and we're actually playing a whole 20 cards that either are or are capable of producing artifacts. So we've got better than a 1 in 3 chance that we'll have an artifact on turn 2 in this deck. So I think that Toolcraft Exemplar and Inventor's Apprentice are just, again, no-brainers. They're 2 of the most aggressive creatures in the format, and they work in this deck a lot like they work in Vehicles. The Vehicles decks will try to play, you know, 18 to 20 artifacts. We do that too, so I see no reason not to play these guys. And to finish off the creatures, I'm going to play something that's not really a creature, it just makes creatures. We're going to play 2 Servo Exhibition in this deck, which could look a little bit out of place, but I have 3 what I believe are good reasons to play this card. First of all, it's obviously good with Exemplar and Apprentice on turn 2, so we got to get that out of the way. But it's also not bad against mass removal. Let's say you get swept by a Fumigate or Radiant Flames or something. Well, you'll probably still have an equipment or 2 out. So if you can play a Servo Exhibition on the next turn, then you'll have 2 creatures on board after mass removal, both of which can be bigger because of your equipments. So not bad against mass removal to get right back on board and, you know, hook up your dudes to equipment. Now, that's pretty good. And also, I should point this out, Weapons Trainer. If you have a Weapon Trainer and an equipment, and you play a Servo Exhibition, you've just paid 2 mana to put 4 power out among 2 creatures. That is a fine deal. So I think those are 3 decent reasons to play Exhibition, but you could always replace it with 2 more Acolytes or maybe even 2 Expedition Envoys. I just wouldn't play anything outside the sideboard, at least, that costs more than 2 mana in this main deck. And that includes, by the way, the equipment. We're trying to stay very, very low to the ground in this deck for a multitude of reasons, to be honest with you. Not only is it a fast deck, we want to finish the game off as quickly as possible, obviously, but we're doing a lot to set up our dudes on turn 3, turn 4, you know, turn 1 we'll play a creature, turn 2 we may play a Weapons Trainer, we may play a Stonehaven Outfitter, maybe we'll play an equipment and another small creature. Now on turn 3, we're going to either be playing, you know, another small creature or another equipment, and then using the rest of our mana to equip guys. So we don't really have all that mana on turns 3 and 4 to still be playing creatures, at least in most games. We want to be hooking up our dudes to equipment and setting up a really good attack step. in those, mid-game turns here. So I don't want to play a bunch of high, expensive cards or anything. So with that in mind, let's take a look at all of our low-to-the-ground equipment here. Starting off with the two most important things, in my estimation. 4 copies of Bone Saw, amazingly, and 4 copies of Stitcher's Graft. When I first started drafting this deck up, I had 2 copies of Stitcher's Graft in there. Stitcher's Graft is so good, like it became a 4 of. The card is fantastic. It can either make a very aggressive attacker, which is what we're going to try most of the time, or it can make a huge blocker that we never have to worry about that untap clause on, just on a 1/1. Like a Toolcraft Exemplar that doesn't have the bonus, for instance. We suddenly have a 4/4 that can block like a lot of the stuff in the format. But mostly, we're looking for Stitcher's Graft to get in one really, really strong attack step. It's great that it only costs 1 because it allows us to, play it along with other stuff on turn 2 or turn 3. And I'll say that about Bone Saw. Bone Saw is even better because it's just zero mana. The bonus isn't as good, but the drawback isn't as bad either. I love Bone Saw because turn 1 we can play a small guy, turn 2 Weapons Trainer, and then drop a Bone Saw for free. It's so great that it's a free equipment and that it works so well with Weapons Trainer and with Stonehaven Outfitter. Just 1 to equip and 0 to cast is as good as it gets. And in this deck, you're not that worried about the bonus that the equipment gives to you because we're getting bonuses off of Trainer and Outfitter. So even though Bonesaw only gives it +1/+0, if you have those dudes out, you're giving a creature a huge bonus for 1 mana. I do want to come back to Stitcher's Graft for just a second though. Some people would say this card is kind of bad, but honestly the card is great. It gives a huge bonus to a creature, not to mention the bonuses provided by Trainer and Outfitter, and a lot of times the creature will only swing once, maybe twice. And sometimes, actually, you will let the creature die. You'll let it unattach and die. You'll draw a card off of Stonehaven Outfitter, and you just attach the Stitcher's Graft to something else, Sometimes it's not that big of a deal that your dude dies, especially if you get to draw a card. But really, we're just trying to get in as much damage as possible, as early as possible, and Stitcher's Graft is the best equipment in the format for doing that. But there is more equipment here. We're playing 3 copies of Stoneforge Masterwork, 3 copies of Inventor's Goggles, and 4 copies of Captain's Claws. Captain's Claws is just really, really solid piece, just the 2 mana to cast, and 1 to equip. That's pretty good. And we can just, pop out small dudes whenever we attack, and then we can attach those small dudes to other equipments that we have. So Captain's Claws is just, I think, too solid not to play, and can give us a really wide board if it gets out of control. Inventor's Goggles looks a little weird, but we're actually playing 12 Artificers in the deck, making it really attractive. Again, if we can equip for 0 mana, that is great. Like, that is fantastic. Anytime we can save mana, that is good. And then Stoneforge Masterwork, well, again, we have 12 Artificers, we have 10 humans, we have 10 allies. It is very likely that a couple of our creatures will share creature types. So just for the 1 mana to cast and 2 to equip, Stoneforge can be a great deal, especially if the game goes on late and we get a big board. 22 lands in this deck, which seems like maybe a little much for a deck where everything costs 1 and 2. But again, we're a very hungry deck here. We're going to be paying equip costs all game, and by turn 3 or 4, we want to have enough mana to play something and equip and all that. So, fairly hungry. I think 22 lands is right. And peep the 1 Needle Spires here. I think that if we had a couple extra bucks, we could run 2 Needle Spires, but I don't want to run a bunch of lands that come into play tapped. I don't necessarily like that. But Needle Spires is obviously pretty good in this deck. Like, best case scenario, period. Let's say we have Needle Spires, 7 lands, Stitcher's Graft, again, best case scenario. Stitcher's Graft, Stonehaven Outfitter, and Weapons Trainer. I believe that translates to a 14-point swing. But even if it's just like a Bone Saw, we're still doing like 10 damage in that scenario. So, pretty good. I think we want to pack at least the 1 double strike land creature in a deck where our creatures can get like pretty big after all the bonuses. Here's a fairly important sideboard right here. Foregone Venet Bombardment is sort of a no-brainer. It's the cheapest removal we can possibly play, and we do want to blow out smaller creatures against other aggro decks. Now, Fragmentize is in there mostly against Smuggler's Copter and other artifacts. Stasis Snare in there not only against creatures and vehicles, but mostly against Emrakul. We can really protect against that thing coming down. But the things I want to get to are the aerial responders and the reckless bushwhackers. 4 copies of reckless bushwhacker in this sideboard for those games against control decks, like heavy hardline control, where we have to win as quickly as possible, no questions asked. Reckless bushwhacker can come down turn 3 or 4, and sometimes, especially on turn 4, just win the game for us. So if we need to win as quickly as possible, reckless bushwhacker is where we want to be. Now, if we're playing against other aggro decks, aerial responder is fantastic and could really make it into the main deck. As far as blocking other aggro decks, this guy's a lot like a mini Kaladesh in a way, you know? We always talk about Kaladesh, he can just like block a creature and gain 3 life, you know? And this guy can block a creature and gain 2 life and blank a lot of smaller aggro boards. But in this deck, he's crazy. He's got 3 different abilities, so he goes really, really well with all of the equipments, you know? Even with just a 1 or 2 point power boost, this guy can be a huge Vigilance flying lifelink. And I do want to point out how incredible Vigilance is with Stitcher's Graft, by the way. Like, Aerial Responder could go in the main deck, but I mostly only want him against aggro. But against aggro, he is ridiculous. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 60 points, which is good because the main deck is only going to cost you a little north of $20, like $21.50, and the sideboard is going to cost you a little less than $5, or right at $5 mostly. So you're looking at just north, I think it's like $25.50 to build this deck with the lower prices on TCG Player, and that is a steal for this thing, man. You're paying literally like, what, a fifth, or actually like a sixth of the price of red-white vehicles, and this deck is every bit as good in a lot of ways. I'm telling you. We don't run quite as many creatures, and we don't have anything as powerful as Smuggler's Copter, but we do have a fair amount of resiliency in this deck. We get blown out by removal or a sweeper or something like that. Then we've still got some equipments on board, so if we just play 1 creature, we can equip everything to it and get right back in the game with this huge guy out of nowhere. And that happens a lot in modern equipment players, like modern mono-white equipment players. You know what I'm talking about. You know, if you get swept, then you can just play 1 small guy, equip 3 things to him, and just swing with like an 8-power dude out of nowhere. There is a lot of like waiting to draw the right thing, but we do have a fair amount of card advantage for a deck like this. You know, we may not have Smuggler's Copter, but we do have Stonehaven Outfitter, we have Stoneforge Acolyte. That is just good enough to count as decent card advantage in a deck that is mostly extremely low to the ground aggro. Those kind of aggro decks don't usually get card advantage, but we get a little. Believe it or not, that is all I've got for this deck. That was a really, really fast deck, if I'm counting the time right. But it's a fairly straightforward deck tech too. You know, a lot of the creatures are in there for pretty obvious reasons. Weapon Trainer, Stonehaven Outfitter, no-brainers. Toolcraft Exemplar, Inventor's Apprentice, obvious, right? Stonehaven or Stoneforge Acolyte probably goes in the deck too, right? Like, the deck only took like 3 rewrites to make the deck that you see here. And usually I go through like 5 or 6 rewrites. But this one was pretty straightforward, and I feel like it's fairly easy to put together. So try this one out. It's only 20 or 25 bucks, and these cards will actually be in the format for a little while. You know, Wizards just announced a couple of weeks ago the rotation schedule has changed. So when Amonkhet comes out, Oath and Battle for Zendikar will not be rotating out. They'll be in the format for another 6 months or so. So this deck is actually going to last for a while. Fairly cheap, lots of decent cards, and some of these cards will translate into other decks like Exemplar, Inventor's Apprentice, you know, Servo Exhibition. They will all translate well into other decks. So you pick up these right now, you'll have some decent cards for the next like 2 years. But what are we doing next time? I keep getting this suggestion too. We're going to do budget mill next time. I know everybody wants a mill deck, right? Like, a lot of people ask me for this constantly. And for a while I wasn't convinced that we could make it work, but it turns out, especially with Delirium being so good right now, I don't want to give them Delirium or anything, but I do think there is an argument for a decent blue-white mill deck in this format right now that's not going to cost us hardly any money to build, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to be doing it next time. You're welcome, mill players. And yes, I did wear my Batman shirt on purpose because equipments, he's got all the best equipments. But anyway, if you like the content, just hit the thumbs up button. You can also sub if you're new so you can get all the deck techs and stuff, and I'll see you guys later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Here's an end card. Don't leave, there's an end card. My favorite wrestler of all time, Mick Foley, again, by a lot. Mick Foley is awesome. My favorite video game is a little bit harder. I like old school RPGs. I like Chrono Trigger. I like Earthbound. I like FF6, you know, but here's something controversial. Just throwing you a bone if you want some controversy. I actually think that Chrono Cross is a better game than Chrono Trigger. Like, the music is better, the setting is better, the story is better, the characters are better. Like, Chrono Cross is superior. Sorry, I like it more.